Megan Gilman has experience in over 800 projects in 14 countries focused on energy efficiency, distributed solar energy, and green building. As the co-founder and president of North 39 Energy and Active Energies, chair of the board for the directors of Holy Cross Energy, and on the board of directors for the Colorado Rural Electric Association, she continues to do amazing work on deploying green technology projects around the world. Everyone, please welcome Megan Gilman.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for that intro. And we have a really exciting panel for you today, so I'm excited to introduce it to you all. And we had a great intro from the gentleman at Guzman to help understand a little bit more about the structure of the rural electric program as it stands. As we reached the mid-1930s, most of the larger areas of the country, more populous, were already electrified, whereas 9 out of 10 rural homes still did not have electricity. So we had a huge undertaking where neighbors band together and did something that seemed geographically infeasible, too expensive to do, required some government subsidy, and got these rural parts of America electrified. And it sounds a lot like the challenge in front of us that seems difficult. One of the areas of strength that we see in some of these rural areas actually brings me back to this morning's topic on the focus on democracy and how do we get involved and stay involved in these issues. And what is really fortunate is because of this structure, in a lot of these rural areas, we have a democratic process in place to allow you all, if you live in rural areas, to participate in selecting the people who run your utility companies. And so that's what we see in many of these areas, whether those are municipal boards or the boards of electric cooperatives that we have. So, and we also have some distinct challenges, as they had just spoke about, where these are generally organizations that are too small to be vertically integrated, so they have power supply agreements with others that we need to navigate as we look at the best ways to go forward. So I, for one, am excited and hopeful about where we're all headed, and but for sure it's a path that requires some heavy lifting, difficult decisions coming up, and so we have just the people to help you all understand what's coming next and where they are and where they think they're going with this paradigm shift in some of their rural electric systems. So they'll each share with us just for a few minutes some of their insights as far as where they are and where they're going, and then we'll have a nice hearty discussion when it's over about any questions we have for them. So first we have Chris Riley, and you all met Chris in the last go-around, so I'll spend a little less time introducing him. Chris co-founded and serves as the president of Guzman Energy. Luis Reyes on the end. Luis is the chief executive officer and general manager at Kit Carson Electric Cooperative, which is in northern New Mexico. Prior to becoming their CEO, Luis served as a system engineer there as well. And he has been successful in securing American Recovery and Reinvestment funds for the acceleration of broadband and smart grid technology in his area, and has really been able to thrust his cooperative on the forefront of some of these issues and tackling these big challenges in rural America. David Hornbacher is the director of the City of Aspen Utilities, responsible for the provision of water and electric services, including hydroelectric production for the City of Aspen. Prior to that, David was with Xcel Energy. And in 2015, Aspen Utilities achieved the community goal of 100% renewable energy, making it just the third municipal utility to do so. And then finally, just to my right is Bryan Hannegan. Bryan is the president and CEO of Holy Cross Energy, based in Glenwood Springs. Holy Cross Energy is an electric cooperative serving roughly 46,000 customers, roughly from here to Vail, and then some points west. Prior to coming to Holy Cross Energy, Bryan worked for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. He also held positions at AREI, as well as various positions on staff at the U.S. Senate, the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and also worked as acting special assistant to the president on economic policy. So I will now turn it over to Chris to give us just a little bit of insight from him.
Thank you. And I'll be brief since you just heard about us. As I said, we created Guzman Energy because we believed there was an opportunity for somebody to come in and work to facilitate the transition from the old energy economy into the renewable age. And not that there's a shortage of folks out there working on this very thing, but what was different about us is we didn't have any of the legacy positions to protect. We don't, we're not living with decisions we made 20 or 30 years ago. And so we're able to come in with what we think at least is a fresh perspective and also a clean slate from an economic perspective. And we have no opposition and in fact are strongly in support of transitioning to renewable energy and helping facilitate folks such as those here on the panel in executing whatever it is they want as they recognize how the paradigm has shifted. So we view our role as somebody to come in as an alternative to the system as it has been structured classically and work with people to find ways to be flexible, find ways to transition to a more renewable mix and provide whatever solutions they need. First major transaction we did was with Luis Reyes, who's here on the panel, which was a transaction that made a lot of news and continues to do so as the first distribution co-op to leave the G&T model and move, as I talked about previously, from that black line down to the other line. And we're proud this transaction, Luis will talk about, will save the community in excess of $50 million, lower their wholesale rate over 40%, and on top of that, allow them to become solar energy independent by 2022, and do all of this while saving money. So together we were able to facilitate a transaction that is cheaper energy, cleaner energy, price certainty, all of these things together. And so that's what we do, and that's what we're working to do throughout the West and throughout the country. I'll the rest of these and let.
Here you go.
So good afternoon. My name is Luis Reyes. I'm the CEO of Kit Carson Electric. We're headquartered in Taos, New Mexico. I've been with the company over 34 years and have been the CEO for 25 years. How do I go back? So again, Kit Carson Electric is in the north central part. We're a diversified co-op. So Kit Carson has 30,000 electric meters, 6,400 broadband customers, and we own a propane company. We actually formed the propane company because we thought the fuel cell was actually going to become a supply in the future. And so we wanted to prepare ourselves back as early as 2000 for what we thought was going to be a changing energy landscape. We serve in 3 counties, 6 municipalities, and kind of like this area, we have 4 ski areas and we're a tourist community. And so, and we're a winter nighttime peaker, and that's important when you're trying to do 100% solar when your peak is at night. So basically our new model is first finding the right power supplier. In my tenure there, Kit Carson has had 3 power suppliers. We had Plains Electric from 51 to 2000, Tri-State G&T with a merger of Plains Electric and Tri-State from 2000 to 2016, and then Guzman Energy to present. And at the end of the day, we found that Guzman Energy, a private power supplier, actually fit our model going forward for the new future than the old model. As Chris mentioned, the old model was done for a purpose, but as times change, the G&Ts really just haven't changed with those times. I'll give you an example with Plains Electric. Our contract was a 2020 contract, expired in 2020. With Tri-State, that contract would expire in 2040, and with many other co-ops in Tri-States Federation, 2050. And the contract we have today is a 10-year contract. And as it was mentioned earlier, the 2 previous contracts with the G&Ts either had 0% renewable or 5%, and that was it. So if a co-op like Kit Carson attained their 5% goal in 2010, there was 30 years that we could not do anything in that space unless the board of directors changed that. In today's contract, we've already had 3 iterations where we've had the price actually come down as one. Second, it was also always a desire for Kit Carson to become as renewable as possible. And so through a series of meetings with our members, we decided to go 100% solar. That's how it started. How do we get to 100% solar? At the end of the day, in partnership with Guzman, we are becoming 100% daytime solar by 2022. And then the other part that we changed is on to your, I guess, my left, your right, is storage. We think as we go forward, storage is going to play an integral role in making sure that we can utilize the solar resource properly, but also start to address our nighttime peak. The other thing it gives us is start creating rates around that resource. And so we are trying to change actually the rate design thought process in moving forward. And then finally, a partnership with NREL. You know, there's 2 worlds. There's a model and the what if, and then there's a model that we do is doing it. And so we needed someone to validate that it could be done as we're doing it. A little bit different. People do the model and then decide, and many co-ops do this, and I'm a big co-op supporter, but we talk ourselves out of good ideas. Right? At the end, we validate and says the model doesn't let us. Today we have probably 7 communities that are 100% solar already during the daytime. And so the models that came out 10 years ago that said you couldn't put 100% solar on a distribution feeder because it caused all these disruptions is not true, at least in our system. We have had no problems of that. So as we move forward, NREL is an important validator of our model that will adjust either way. It's not a tool to stop us, it's a tool to help us find a solution. Again, we've gone over our initiative. It is to build a distributed energy resource plan. So we want to build 35 to 41 megawatt arrays around our territory. One reason is community. Every community wants a solar array. It's amazing once you bring this idea to a community, they want theirs. So different than buying just green tags or green credits off the market, we actually have hard assets, steel and glass in the ground. Today we have about 8 megawatts, or about 22% solar, daytime solar today. Our prices are about 4.5 to 5 cents, fixed for 30 years. So our challenge to other co-ops and municipalities and power supplies in 10 years, is your price going to be the same as it is today? In 20 years, is it going to be the same as it is today? So we're trying to also future-proof our pricing so that we can give a better signal to our members. And again, this is, as Megan mentioned, this was driven by the members. The members actually met with Guzman. They wanted to meet their power supplier to determine if this is a good fit. I often go around saying, you know, with Plains and Tri-State, and they're good companies, we probably met once a year, so we probably met 25 times in 25 years. In the 2 years with Guzman, we probably met 50 times in 2 years. Our members know Guzman, and that's a good feeling for our members to have. Again, repetitive, I can't kind of underestimate the importance of this plan to go 100% solar. It can be done. And we hope that's the way that we'll lead into the new energy future. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Dave Hornbacher, the Director of Utilities for the City of Aspen. And as we sort of look at what the future has in store for renewable energy, I thought I'd move back into the past for a moment and sort of talk about the City of Aspen, because it's a model that others might be able to look at, likewise as we learn from others as we go into the future. So first, let's just talk about pioneers for a moment. You know, being a pioneer was sort of a lonely road. You know, you didn't see anybody else around. You didn't quite know where you were going, but you had the tenacity and the strength of your own hands to get there, and you had vision. And that's what it took as a pioneer as we settled the West. When we think about renewable energy, if we go back several decades ago, there wasn't a formula. There was a lot of uncertainty, unknowns of price. How do you integrate that in? You know, being 100% solar was unachievable. And so that was sort of a bit of the past. And over time, you know, the pioneers learned to progress, and they started to harness wind to help on their livestock, to make a difference in their life. And as we move forward in renewable energy, in 2002, the city of Aspen was a pioneer with several other members in buying into a wind farm in Kimball, Nebraska. And so that was sort of in the earlier days of wind farms. It was 7 towers, 1.5 megawatts each, and 10.5 megawatts total. So it was pretty exciting times. And what that really did is it became sort of the emphasis of part of our goal of how we achieve 100% renewable energy portfolio. And so that was a goal set in 2005, and it was achieved. It was set for 2015, and we did achieve that 2015. We started off with a base of owned hydro and a Western Area Power Authority contract. And then we started buying some wind. We bought more wind in 2002. We bought more wind in 2009. And then as we entered 2012, we did a power purchase agreement with a new project over in Ridgeway, Colorado. And then we had that last bit to try and get us right to 100% renewable. And at that point, through our wholesale provider, we bought additional wind and a little bit of landfill gas. So in the end, our 100% renewable portfolio is 46% hydro. It's 54% wind and 53% wind and 1% landfill gas. So that was the formula that worked for the city of Aspen, but you can see it took a long time to get there. But in doing so, we also maintained some of the, we're actually in the bottom 25% of rates in the state of Colorado. And so what is the future? What does that really look like, and how do we get there? So with that, you know, what are the pioneers of the future? I think the page is open. It hasn't been written yet. We just talked about the past, but the past is not the future. We have to think differently. We have to be experimental. We need to really question, is it all coming from bulk power purchases, or is it local distribution? Is it a combination? Is it stored? How does electric vehicles put into this? The next decade is going to be incredible for the electric industry and the changes that we see and the things that we can integrate into our system. And so going back, I want to talk about that wind farm for a moment. So back in 2002, we had a wind farm, 10.5 megawatts. Well, here we are in 2018, 16 years later, that wind farm has now been retired. Those 7 towers are now replaced with 10 towers. They're about 30 foot higher. They have newer equipment, new blades, and it's now producing 30 megawatts of power on the same site. So you've taken advantage of land that you've owned, of connection to the grid, and you're just producing more energy at that. And what we've seen is costs change. So while in the early days we paid a premium for energy, this change at this site is actually saving this utility money. In fact, our wind portfolio is going to drop by about 20% by this action alone. But what we're also seeing with that is increased competition. And so as prices drop, I think you're going to find yourself maybe competing a little bit more, a little bit harder for some of the projects that are out there. And it's something you need to keep in mind, especially about the timing of when you go after these. You may not be the only pioneer or the only one in line at that time. And so this is what it might look like in the near future. You are one of many pioneers out there looking to how you can increase your renewable energy portfolio to achieve that 100%, and you're not alone. You can learn from each other. You can have these experiments. You can see, as Luis had mentioned, how you can integrate more solar into it. It is really an exciting time, but you still are pioneers. And I look forward to the changes that we're going to see and to be a part of it. While we're at 100% renewable, we still need to work diligently to maintain that. We constantly are evaluating other projects. We're looking to see how they compare to our existing contracts. Do we need to make changes in those contracts? Our future is not written yet. And we have our challenge of keeping, our place as being 100% renewable utility.
Well, I want to pick up on David's pioneer metaphor, because there's along the lines of what you've seen here, and they've laid down a wagon trail now that the rest of us can choose to follow. And as the history of transportation in this country evolved from wagon trails to roads and then to highways and then ultimately to the superhighways that we now course throughout the country, so too will the pathways, I think, towards a cleaner energy economy begin to evolve over time. I don't present as near a polished, finished item as these guys do. Holy Cross Energy is still very much a work in progress. We're about 3 times the size of Kit Carson. We are somewhere between the black line and the other line that Chris showed. We're not purely a distribution cooperative, although as you see on the map here in the small font to the right, we do primarily operate at distribution, but we also own 120 miles of transmission. And as I'll show you in a moment, we also own some generation as well. So we're as close to a vertically integrated cooperative as one might get. And one of our big strategic questions going forward is that a model that might work? Not only focusing just on the distribution and the local, but thinking about a role in the larger wholesale markets where there are economies of scale that can benefit our customers. Having some control over our transmission infrastructure and how that plays. Lots of questions that come to bear when you think about participating at all levels of the value chain. And then we haven't even talked yet about what will happen with us with respect to our customers, our members' wants and needs behind the meter, beyond distribution now, in the homes, in the businesses, on the highways and in the parking lots. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But you can see our service territory there. Megan alluded to it. We serve the Eagle Vale Valley. We serve the Roaring Fork Valley, with the exception of the city of Aspen and the city of Glenwood Springs. We also serve areas south of I-70, west of Glenwood. A very diverse populace. In many ways, our demographic mirrors the demographic of the country. We're about 1% the size of the largest utilities in the country, PG&E, Florida Power and Light, for example. So if there's a 1% solution that's out there, we hope to be the first ones to find it and to lead a responsible transition to a clean energy future. This is our power supply, and I apologize for these colors, the various shades of blue here. But at the bottom, you see that darker shade of blue. That's 46% of our power supply coming from the Comanche 3 coal-fired power station outside Pueblo. It came online in 2010. It's quite possibly going to be the last large-scale coal plant to come online in this country by all the trends that are out there. It's clean, it's got full environmental controls, it's highly efficient. It's probably going to be the last one to retire for economic reasons in this country. And yet we own 8% of it for the next 30 years. So there's challenge number one. On top of that, you see our hydro allocation, similar to what David talked about for the city of Aspen. We also have a purchase power agreement with a 12 megawatt biomass plant in the town of Gypsum, where we're using some forest restoration activities to generate wood and wood pellets that come in and are burned then in a combustion unit to create a renewable form of electricity. The lighter blue on either ends in our winter peaks, because like Luis, we're a winter nighttime peak utility. That's wind supply that we buy on the market on a contractual basis from our power provider, Xcel Energy. We have an interesting contract. It's a little bit like an open marriage in the sense that we're married to them as their full requirements provider, but we have an economy energy provision that allows us to go date somebody else if we find a better deal. And so that gives us some interesting flexibility that we're presently exploring. Sometimes we date our wife. In this case with Xcel, we're buying a wind energy from them. As you know, they're putting more and more wind and solar in the Pueblo area and in eastern Colorado under the proposed Colorado Energy Plan. That'll boost the overall renewable supply in our portfolio and hopefully give us more opportunities for us to buy 100% renewables on spec. which is that last little bit at the top there. That's our residual that we pull out of the XL power pool. It's a mixture of wind and solar, some coal, declining amounts, but a lot of natural gas. And so as a result, our power supply profile, we've seen a 40% reduction in our carbon emissions just over the last 5 years. But as good as that is, as a climate scientist, I'll tell you, that's not good enough. And so we want to take on more. We have 2 5-megawatt solar projects coming online through purchase power agreements that are not just a contract, but actually a lease to own. So these are 10-year contracts, one of which is in the Roaring Fork Valley here near Aspen, where we'll be an owner of the project after 10 years, because as David pointed out, the solar technologies are going to get better, having access to the land and having access to the connected infrastructure. If there's a breakthrough with perovskites for new solars that are 2 times, 5 times more effective, out pop the old panels, in pop the new. So we're thinking about options not just from the bulk power supply, but also locally in our communities as well. That 5 megawatt of renewable solar that's here in the Roaring Fork Valley, we're providing that to perhaps the town of Snowmass Village as a way to help them meet their 100% renewable demands. Not only are they buying credits, but they're supporting the development of a resource in their community that they can point to, that they can take the pride of ownership. It's sort of a different spin on the community solar model. For us, though, that means that we really need to think about how we operate our grid, because now our power supply isn't just in front of our distribution transformer, it's behind it, and through aggressive activities in promoting net metering, promoting rooftop solar through rebates, promoting energy efficiency and responsive loads, heat pump water heaters and smart thermostats and even electric vehicles that can respond to pricing signals. Now all of our generation resources are all throughout our system at various different scales. And I think what the key challenge is for a lot of utilities is taking that one-way highway of electricity from high voltage, big power plants, to low voltage, passive consumer, and taking that model that Chris and Jeff talked about in the previous session and actually turning it on its head and having those electrons and the information and the finance moving in both directions in a much more frequent and a much more dynamic pattern. So what does the future hold? There are several trends. We've talked about those. The big one for us as a utility is flat load growth. And when you bring on the fact that we're adding in rooftop solar and energy efficiency improvements, for us, it's actually flat to negative. Name for me the last industry that actually thrived with negative sales year on year. Right? If you can introduce me to that person, I'd love to ask them for advice, because that's the challenge facing not only us, but a lot of utilities around the country. And yet, at the same time, investing in infrastructure to make our grid much more of a platform, much more dynamic, that allows you, the consumer, to do those transactions that you increasingly want to do. I want to sell my solar into the market. I want to charge my EV when the prices are better. I only want to use energy that's created in my neighborhood. That's going to take some investment on our part. So for us, we have to figure out how to square that circle. We've got connected everything. We've got more consumer choice. Not yet here in Colorado, certainly in places like California. If you don't like the utility that you've got, you can go switch to another one. Same as in Texas. So how long does that happen before it comes here as well, as folks in Boulder, as folks in Pueblo increasingly are unsatisfied with the arrangements that they have with their utility? So at the very bottom, I ask this question, and I don't know the answer, but our power supply agreements, as we've come to consider them, the long 20, 30-year fixed engagements, the parent-child relationship, are those dead? Given the pace of technology, the evolution of things just in the last 5 to 10 years alone, the proliferation of options at the end-use consumer, the way we use the grid and interact with it, the fact that we can take clean electricity now and offset oil in the transportation sector, or natural gas in the heating sector, or in buildings or in industry. Are power supply agreements dead, and do we really need to think about a much more agile and dynamic way of doing business that's more in tune with the innovation cycle? I don't know, but I think it's smart to prepare as though the answer might be yes. And so as we look ahead to our future, we're thinking more about ways that we can put the power in your hands. Let you make the choices as the members and as the owners of Holy Cross Energy. Let you make the choices that allow you to get a more sustainable and more user-friendly product and service, a set of services, all the while not sacrificing the things which you rely on from utilities all around the country, that safety, that reliability, and that affordability. It's important for us to maintain those because that's our license. If we don't do those right, then we can't engage you on giving you what you want before somebody else does. With that, thanks for being here. Thanks to Chip and company for the invite, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, to launch into some questions that I have for the panel, it seems as though we have kind of these three main buckets that would come to your mind. Okay, as operators of utility companies, what can you financially do to get us there? What can you technically do to get us there? And the thorniest of all, what can you contractually do to get us there? That one involves lawyers, the first two, hopefully not. So we'll start with the hardest one first then and come back to kind of a version of the question that Bryan had shown. Looking at what can you contractually do, you know, Kit Carson has taken a specific avenue of divorcing, leaving their power supplier, finding a new one. So what do you all see as the future of these power supply agreements, these long-term, restrictive? If we look, we're hearing from our members, then our power suppliers are hearing from us. We want more renewables. We want batteries. We want to be untied from these older assets that might not look so good right now on paper. So what do we do about these power supply agreements?
Well, for Kit Carson, the first thing we did was we bought out our contract. So we negotiated with Tri-State, determined that going to 2040 was not in our members' best interest. And so we negotiated a buyout. And so in that buyout, as I mentioned earlier, it's future pricing. The next 6 years we'll pay the exit fee with the cost of power. Some years it's going to be higher, some years it's going to be lower. But when that exit fee is completely paid, we have no debt obligation on our books for generation assets. So that means we can, through Guzman, play in the marketplace. So if the market's 4 cents a kilowatt hour, it's 4 cents a kilowatt. There's no increase in debt other than anything that we add ourselves through a purchase power. I think the second thing that co-ops should really advocate for is kind of off-ramps within their current contract. Every 5 years, have a look and see, are we still where we need to be competitively? And on the, let's say, the Excel side, are we getting everything that we need so that co-op can exit? Because all that's going to happen, I believe, is you're going to have a lot of people go behind the meter, and they're going to be your larger C&I customers. And all that does is it spreads that what they lead to the residential customer. And the residential customers' rates will just continue to increase. So I do think there has to be a fundamental change in that power supply contract. And for us, it was also getting the opportunity to get low-cost renewable energy. It's reliable, it's affordable, it's scalable. Right, I can put it on the roof, and I can put it in a football field. You know, and the economy of scale gets me a better price. But I think that's what at least Kit Carson viewed going forward, and I think these are all things that can be done with existing contracts. But I think it's going to take a lot of public pressure on G&Ts and investor owners to really relook at those long-range agreements.
Yeah, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility that those G&T, the larger providers, the IOUs, are also experiencing some of the same pressures that we're experiencing. And they're looking at their business model and they're saying, you know, perhaps these contracts that we're in right now from our side were negotiated at a different time, where we wanted to lock things down on the same life cycle as the assets we were investing in, and we wanted to match everything up in a way that was durable and long-term focused. And now they're looking at competitive wholesale markets for electricity. They're looking at all of the new providers that are out there that can provide different resources. They're looking at lower cost renewables in bulk. And they're saying, you know, the tether may not work for us either. And so to the extent that you engage in that conversation on both sides of the contract in good faith, I think you might be surprised that you end up having more flexibility than you otherwise thought you did. In the meantime, There are two things that I wake up every morning and I thank God for. One is PURPA, because PURPA allows me to site resources of a renewable nature on my grid despite what my contract says. Or actually because my contract says you are allowed to do PURPA in spite of everything that we're providing you. Right? So those 5 megawatt solar plants, the one in Eagle Vale and the one here, those are PURPA projects. And we can do as many of those as we want all day long. We can do the same thing behind the meter. So if I can't get what I want for the members of Holy Cross in front of the meter, I'm going to figure out a way to make it really nice for them to deliver those resources from the customer side, behind the meter. It might cost me a little bit more, but that's better than not doing anything at all. The second thing I'm thankful for is the declining costs, which I think are long-term in the technologies around renewable energy. The first solar project that we did at Holy Cross was 12 cents a kilowatt hour, right? The projects we're bringing on now are less than half that, right? So part of this is figuring out where do we want to catch the falling knife, but part of this is also realizing that if the next project is 5 cents and 4 cents and 3 cents, that gives us headroom without raising rates to then take some of those benefits and use that to offset the added costs of maybe prematurely retiring an asset that we don't want anymore. And so when you have that conversation with your members, as Luis did with Kit Carson, or as David and his colleagues have had with the city of Aspen, you might find that there's a lot more flexibility there than you would think just by reading the letter. And then at the end of the day, everybody's got their price, right, Luis? So you go and you have a conversation and you figure out whether that price is worth paying.
So I have a question for Chris. You heard what the people want, right? They want flexible, cheap, renewable energy, but they want off-ramps. So how do you, as this new power provider, give them what they want? Because I think the old saying is, banks love flexibility. So how do you get these deals financed? You know, how do you make this happen? We have long-term assets, but people who want flexibility.
All right, so this is, first, the entire thesis of our company is you know, to Bryan's question, do we believe that these agreements are going to be around, at least as we know them? Our belief is absolutely no. And again, this is why we created the company. Now, the weird thing that does is, if we are successful, you know, as I said, we view our role as facilitating this transition. What that means, said differently, is we are putting ourselves out of a job over time. If we are successful in doing what we're trying to do, we will get to a world where we're not needed anymore. And you know, that takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you get comfortable with that and know that you can go do some really exciting things, and if you have the long view as a company, we're no dummies, we certainly are looking at ways where we can provide value in a different way in a world that these folks are describing. Once you get used to that, the idea isn't so scary, and in fact, it's exciting. And so, you know, the entire approach we have taken is, rather than fight this, just embrace it and let's facilitate it and let's work together. Our view is very much that the contracts of the future are going to be shorter duration. They're going to have to be much more collaborative, and we don't want to get in a situation where we're 10 years from now, somebody's reading, you know, has an army of lawyers reading through our agreement, trying to find a way out of it. So we work from the beginning to try to put that flexibility in. Now, you're right, ultimately you have to match it to assets, and unfortunately these assets require long-term financing as the cost of renewables come down. My personal view is that the contract period of those is going to have to come down as well. You're simply not going to be, these PPAs that are signed at 10 cents, 12 cents, somebody's going to be looking at those really closely a few years from now, and you can buy the same thing at 2 cents or 3 cents. But these are exactly the challenges, and so not that we pretend to have the answer, but we're excited to jump in and work with these to figure it out, and we believe very much in structuring these agreements shorter term, collaborative, and picking our way through this uncertain path together.
Now, Dave, being in a municipal situation, you're kind of at the forefront of policy meets utility. What do you see, and there's the panel, if you want to weigh in, on what would be helpful policy from the state, nationally if there's any chance that happens, but even just from the state, what is helpful policy to get this done, particularly get this done in rural America? Are there things you need?
So I guess more and more pressure that comes to bear on the G&Ts to become increasingly what's called modernized and responsive. I mean, we talked about how we as utilities are trying to make sure that as Bryan mentioned, the power is with you, and how we need to provide that service and other services now. Otherwise, we might be cast aside for somebody else coming in. G&Ts are no different, and they need to sort of embrace this and figure out ways to do it. PURPA was a good example that allowed an override of otherwise very straight contracts to embrace renewable energy projects. And so something like that, or a continuation of that, I think is real effective.
Perfect. Now, I was warned I wasn't allowed less than 2 minutes left to go to questions, so I am just over that threshold. So does anyone have any questions you'd like to ask?
While they're generating, Megan, I'd also ask, a very helpful policy would be clarification on storage. Storage is neither generation nor transmission nor distribution nor customer asset, but it's vitally important to allow us to maintain our grid so that we can deliver the services that we need. Even in the limit, if we don't buy any power, we simply are a platform for others to move power around, whether it's, as you'll hear tonight, via blockchain mechanism or competitive markets. We're going to need storage to balance the grid. And so right now, a lot of our agreements don't allow us to put storage on our part of the system. But yet the G&Ts and the IOUs can. How's that fair?
Good question. Okay.
Hello, James Eggleston from Power Ledger. Hey, I'm actually presenting on a panel tonight. It's about distributed energy generation and the blockchain. And I really felt that maybe we should have been speaking with you guys. My question is, I guess, how can we help? So what my company does is we have a blockchain application that provides settlement, meter reading, and invoicing in energy markets. So we've built a trading engine for Japan, for KEPCO, they're like the second largest retailer, and work with Australia's largest retailer, Origin Energy, India, Thailand, BCPG. I guess from our perspective and from the community space is, how can we help here? What are your pain points, say from a retail perspective? What we do is produce a software that can facilitate, say, trading electricity between neighbours through the regulated market. These innovations are out here. What can we do to help?
Think about how you interact with the legacy system where if I'm lucky I get 1 meter read a month. You're talking about an incredible scale up in the number and the order, the pace of the transactions that are going on out there. If we just have 10 meter reads a day on the Holy Cross system, that's over a billion data points in a year. And we need some assistance to figure out how to handle that, how to build a new set of business models together around that.
I can take one more.
My name is Gary Dirks. I'm with Arizona State University. Bryan, I'd like to pick up exactly where you left off with your comment about batteries. It's very clear now that 1 to 3 hour storage it works. You mentioned the issues of maybe getting the ability to buy them. But for peak shaving, a couple of hours, it's great. Can the panel speculate on when we're going to have batteries cheap enough to do overnight, and then perhaps multi-day storage? And will we ever get to storage for seasonality?
Well, I can speak to that. Right now, and I guess more in general terms, Carson with Guzman has actually put out an R5 to turn on into an RFP to put about 4 megawatt hours of storage on our system probably in 2019 timeframe to exactly determine what the different value streams for storage are. So we're getting from the industry what they think they are, but then we're going to apply those real time to determine if peak shading, maybe an upgrade design, resiliency. We have some members that may want to pay for 100% power, that it never goes out. So by 2019, we'll have real life applications, and then based on that value, blend it into an overall rate to see what the cost of electricity is with storage. So we are currently right in the middle of that process.
The thing that scares me and the thing that should scare anybody living in a place like California is that low pressure, that high pressure system that comes in that suppresses the wind with low clouds that suppresses the solar in a world where California is 100% renewables, and you need multiple days and gigawatts of quantity of storage. That to me remains the big unsolved grand challenge. I know you guys are working on it at Arizona State. We have a very similar challenge, thinking about how we move our peaks into the summer months to kind of flatten things out. Batteries are good, but we need long-term, big duration storage if we're going to solve the climate problem.
Well, thank you so much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. Appreciate your attention.